They thought time would bury her secrets, that silence would keep her final words locked away. But the morning a stranger appeared at my doorstep, holding an envelope with my mother's handwriting. The whole house seemed to breathe again, as if it had been waiting for this moment. And with his arrival, the truth she left behind finally began to stir. I grew up believing my mother died with nothing but memories to her name, no property, no letters, no unfinished business. My relatives insisted she left no will, no instructions, no last wishes. For years, I accepted their version of the story, clinging to the quiet routines that helped me forget. But the stranger's arrival pulls me back into rooms I've avoided, reopening shadows I never dared question. And slowly, the life I thought I understood begins to unravel. The sun wasn't fully awake yet. It hung low behind the neem trees, soft and pale, the way a memory looks just before it fades. I was sweeping the front step, the same way I did every morning, when I felt it. A presence, still, patient, waiting. When I looked up, he was already standing there. A lone man at our rusted gate, his hands folded around a weathered envelope like it was something fragile. For a moment, the whole street went quiet, almost respectful. As if it knew he hadn't come for directions. He had come for me. I don't get many visitors. Not this early. Not ever, really. The mornings are usually mine, soft, predictable, steady. The kettle warming on the stove, the birds arguing in the old mango tree, my aunt's slippers dragging across the hallway floor. But that morning felt different before I even stepped outside. There was a heaviness in the air, the kind that sits in your chest without permission. The man didn't open the gate or call my name. He just stood there, still as stone, watching the ground like it had secrets to tell him. For a second, I thought he might be lost. Or maybe selling something. But then he lifted his head, and I saw it. Recognition. Old, tired, familiar recognition. "I knew your mother," he said softly. And the broom slid right out of my hand. He didn't smile, but his eyes. They held that tired kindness strangers carry when they bring bad news too late. The envelope shifted slightly in his grip, catching the first line of sunlight. I didn't have to touch it to know the handwriting. My mother wrote exactly like she talked, slow, curved, careful not to disturb anyone. I stepped closer. The iron gate groaned like it remembered her too. He didn't move when I walked up to him. Didn't reach the envelope out. Didn't explain. Just held it, steady, as if he needed me to come the rest of the way. Up close, he looked older than I first thought. Lines carved deep around his mouth, as if he spent years keeping words inside. A faint smell of dust and travel clung to him. "How did you know my mother?" I asked. My voice sounded smaller than I intended. He took a long breath. "One day, when you're ready, you'll understand that." His eyes flicked briefly to the house behind me, as if checking for someone else. I felt my stomach tighten. He looked down again at the envelope, then back at me. "This was meant for you." His fingers brushed the edge, almost tender. I didn't reach for it yet. Something in me hesitated. Something old, something buried under years of silence and half-answered questions. The wind shifted. Dry leaves scraped across the ground like whispers. He glanced at the doorway behind me once more. A shadow moved inside the house. My aunt, listening. He stepped back a little. "I promised her," he said, "that I would bring it to you myself. And not step inside." His voice cracked on that last part, just slightly. I finally held out my hand. When the envelope touched my fingers, it felt warm. Carried around long enough to hold someone else's worry. Her name, my name, written in the same looping script I used to trace with my fingertip as a child. My throat tightened. I swallowed hard, but the lump stayed. The man let go slowly, like releasing a living thing. His shoulders dropped with the smallest sigh, as if a weight had shifted from his body to mine. She trusted you? I asked, barely above a whisper. The question slipped out before I could stop it. He looked away. The kind of look a person gives when the truth is too heavy to lift all at once. It wasn't about trust, he murmured. It was about timing. A quiet answer, and a strange one. The gate creaked as he stepped back. But he didn't leave. Not yet. You'll have questions, he said. And someday. I hope you'll find the right ones to ask. His words were gentle, but they fell heavy. Like stones dropped into water. I wanted to ask him more. How did he know her? Why didn't she give this to me herself? Why now? Why after all these years of silence? But before I could open my mouth, he lifted a hand. A small gesture of farewell, or warning. I couldn't tell. Then he turned. And started walking down the empty road. Not fast. Not slow. Just steady, like a man who had waited long enough. I stood there long after he disappeared behind the curve of the street. The envelope rested in my palm, light as paper, heavy as truth. The sunlight finally climbed over the trees, warming the metal of the gate, warming my hands. But the inside of my chest felt cold. Behind me, the house shifted. A quiet creak, a cautious footstep, the sound of someone pretending not to listen. I pressed the envelope against my heart. Her handwriting touched my skin. A pulse I hadn't felt in years. For the first time since she died. I felt like she was standing beside me. But one question stayed, sharp as the morning air. Why did he choose to come now? The house was still dark when I stepped back inside, carrying the envelope against my chest like it might slip away if I loosened my grip. The curtains were half drawn, letting in a thin slice of morning light that fell across the floorboards, the same boards my mother used to walk across in those soft, careful steps of hers. I didn't turn on any lights. I just stood there, in the center of the living room, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the distant ticking of the old wall clock. The envelope seemed louder than both. Its edges pressed into my palm. Its presence filling the room like a forgotten voice finally clearing its throat. I sat down slowly, lowering myself onto the wooden stool near the window, the one that always wobbled but never broke. The air inside the house smelled faintly of dust and detergent, the kind of scent that settles into old furniture and older memories. I laid the envelope on my lap. The paper was soft around the edges, worn from travel, maybe from hands that held it too tightly, or too long. My fingers traced the letters of my name, letters written in her familiar loops. She always wrote like she was stitching something together, piece by piece, careful not to pull too hard or too fast. For a moment, it felt like I was 12 again, sitting at the kitchen table while she wrote grocery lists, birthday notes, small reminders for herself she often forgot anyway. I hadn't seen her handwriting in years. Not since the day they cleaned out her room so quickly, the way people sweep away dust they're afraid to look at. My relatives' voices drifted back to me, soft and rehearsed. She left nothing behind. There were no papers. Nothing important. But the envelope in my lap said otherwise. I turned it over. Something in me hesitated. Something old and familiar, like a warning pressing lightly against the back of my mind. The seal caught my eye first. A thin line of torn paper, uneven, jagged, not the clean rip of a nervous hand, but the quiet, deliberate break of someone who didn't want to be discovered. My breath stalled. I brought the envelope closer, holding it to the window so the light could fall across its opening. The flap wasn't just loose. It had been opened. Fully. And then pressed back down like nothing happened. My heart thudded once. Hard. Sharp. I ran my thumb gently across the broken seal, feeling the tiny raised edges. This wasn't age. This wasn't time. This was someone's fingers. Someone who touched her handwriting before I did. A faint ache crept up my throat. I looked around the room instinctively, though no one was there. But the house felt different now, its silence suddenly heavier, like it knew something I didn't. The refrigerator hummed louder. The clock ticked with a sharper click. Even the air seemed to wait. I whispered into the quiet, barely audible even to myself. "Who opened you?" The envelope didn't answer. But the question lingered in the air, settling like dust on an untouched shelf. Holding the envelope in both hands, I closed my eyes for a moment. I tried to imagine her writing this. The angle of her wrist. The way she used to bite her lower lip when she wanted to say something she wasn't sure she should. But another image slipped in, one I didn't want. Hands that weren't hers. Hands that pried. Hands that took what wasn't meant for them. A memory flickered. My aunt's voice, too quick and too sharp the day after the funeral. Nothing of hers mattered. "We've already checked." Checked. The word hit differently now. I opened my eyes slowly. The envelope trembled just a little, not from my hands, but from the realization settling into me. Someone read her last words before I ever knew they existed. Someone saw what she wanted me to see. And hid it. My stomach sank as another thought pushed its way to the front. Was it the same person who told me she left nothing behind? The sunlight shifted across the room, landing on the old cabinet in the corner. Its doors were slightly crooked, its paint chipped from years of use. It used to hold her letters. Her notebooks. Her receipts. Her quiet life. I hadn't opened it in years. For the first time since she died, I stood and walked toward it. My hand rested on the cabinet's handle, the metal cool against my skin. The envelope lay quiet in my other hand, its weight somehow heavier now. Outside, a crow called out, a sharp sound cutting through the stillness. It made the moment feel even more exposed. I didn't open the cabinet. Not yet. Because I knew, once I did, everything might change. Instead, I looked back at her handwriting one more time. The curves. The softness. The care. And beneath it all, the truth someone tried to bury. I held the envelope close, feeling its edges press into my palm like a heartbeat. One question rose above all the others, steady and cold. Who touched my mother's last message before it reached me? The house felt different the moment I slid my thumb beneath the torn flap. Like it held its breath with me, waiting. The window beside me rattled softly from a breeze that wasn't there a moment ago. Dust floated in the air, slow and delicate, as if it didn't want to settle until the letter was open. I hesitated, just long enough to feel the weight of years press against my chest. Then I unfolded the paper. The ink was faint in some places, darker in others. Her handwriting, soft, curved, trembling at the ends like she wrote it in a hurry or in fear. And the first line hit harder than the morning cold. If you're reading this, they've kept the truth from you. For a moment, everything inside me stopped, my breath, my thoughts, the world around me. The words blurred, then sharpened, then blurred again. I leaned back slowly in the chair, the wooden frame creaking like it remembered my mother sitting there once, maybe thinking about the same things I was reading now. Outside, a motorcycle passed by, its sound drifting away before it reached the room fully. The house swallowed the noise, returning me to silence. I traced the first line with my fingertip, my skin brushing lightly against her ink. There was something fragile about it, like touching a memory I'd forgotten I needed. My mother never wrote big statements. She lived softly. Spoke softly. Loved softly. So for her to start a letter this way. It felt like a warning wrapped inside a confession. My heart tightened, a slow, steady pressure. The paper smelled faintly of something old. Not decay, but time. The kind of scent that clings to things kept hidden too long. A thought slipped into my mind, quiet but sharp. If someone opened the envelope before me, did they read this line? Did they already know the truth she was trying to give me? The air felt colder against my skin. I went back to the letter, bracing myself for whatever came next. Her next words were smaller, almost unsure. Like she knew she had to speak, but feared every sentence. She wrote about a will. One she signed somewhere far from the family home, with people she trusted outside the bloodline. I blinked, reading the lines again. A will. My mother had a will. But no one ever mentioned it. Not once. Not during the funeral. Not during the rushed cleaning of her belongings. Not during the whispered arguments in the hallway when they thought I was asleep. A slow tremor worked its way up my spine. She wrote about signing it quietly, away from prying eyes. She said she wanted to protect me. She said the house held shadows that moved even in daylight. She said she feared the wrong hands would take everything she meant to leave behind. Her handwriting tightened around certain words. I could almost see her gripping the pen too hard, pressing into the paper the way she pressed her lips together whenever something frightened her. And then, one sentence stopped me cold. Be careful whom you trust. My fingers went numb for a moment. The letter slipped slightly, brushing my knees before I caught it. Be careful. Whom you trust. The warning felt like a hand gripping my shoulder. The room suddenly felt smaller. Like the walls leaned in a little, listening. I looked up at the ceiling, at the faint cracks splitting outward like tiny rivers. I'd sat in this room my whole life. I thought I knew it. But now, with her words in my hands, it felt foreign. As if secrets had seeped into the paint, the floorboards, the corners where dust gathered quietly. My mother wrote about fear in ways she never spoke of it. She mentioned they more than once, never naming them, never describing them, just they, as if the shape of the word alone frightened her. I felt a coldness settle in my throat. I read her lines over and over, searching for clues between the letters. She always hid meaning in pauses, in the tilt of her writing, in the softness of her phrasing. But the truth she described wasn't soft. It was sharp. Secretive. Hidden. My aunt's voice echoed in my mind again. She left nothing behind. I swallowed hard. Now I wondered who they truly were. Who had the most to gain by hiding her will? Who touched the envelope before I did? Who kept me in the dark all these years? The letter lay open on my lap, trembling slightly in a breeze that wasn't strong enough to move anything else. And suddenly, I realized. This wasn't just a message. It was a key. A key to something someone didn't want me to unlock. I folded the letter slowly, my hands careful, almost reverent. My mother's words felt alive against my fingertips. As if they were pushing me towards something I wasn't ready to face. The light outside had shifted, turning the room into a muted gold. The shadows stretched longer across the floor, reaching for me, or warning me. I held the letter close, pressing it lightly to my chest. Her ink, her voice, her truth, all resting against my heartbeat. For the first time since she died, I felt her presence not as a memory, but as a message unfinished. The room felt colder. Smaller. Full of eyes I couldn't see. And one question settled heavy inside me, quiet as a whisper. How long has this lie lived around me? The house didn't speak, but it listened. It always had. That morning, when I stepped across the threshold, the air felt heavier, like the walls had been holding their breath for years. Light pushed through the curtains in tired strips, dust turning in it like slow snow. Every step I took made the floor complain, long and low, as if it remembered more than I did. I wasn't here to grieve anymore. Not today. I was here to look. And the house knew it. I started in the hallway, the same one I used to run through as a child, my hands sliding along the wallpaper that now peeled like old skin. Back then, this place felt endless. Now it felt too small, like the past had swelled inside it and left no room for me to breathe. The man's visit still clung to me. His voice quiet. His eyes, not accusing, not kind, just full of something he couldn't say aloud. Guilt, maybe. Or fear. He had stood right here, shifting on his feet, glancing at the staircase as though someone else was listening. Someone who wasn't alive anymore. I kept hearing his last words. You should look around. Carefully. So I did. I moved through the house slowly, letting my fingers trail along surfaces, letting the silence press against my ears. Drawers that hadn't been opened in years groaned awake. A forgotten shawl still held the faint scent of lavender. The mirror in the hallway was fogged with age, refusing to give me my own reflection clearly. It felt like the house was studying me, waiting to see what I would find. Or what I would choose not to. The first place I checked was the living room. Loose floorboards. Corners of rugs curled just slightly, as if someone had once lifted them in a hurry. I knelt beside the fireplace, running my hand along the bricks. One of them clicked, a soft, almost embarrassed sound, but it didn't move. I tried again. Nothing. All right, I whispered. I'll come back. I moved toward the old drawers next, the ones my mother never let me touch. They stuck at first, then gave way with a small sigh. Inside were receipts from years ago, faded photographs, a broken brooch. Nothing dangerous. Nothing helpful. But everything felt intentionally placed, like someone had filled the drawer just to keep it from looking empty. I climbed the stairs. Each step felt like walking deeper into a throat that didn't want to swallow me. My mother's room waited at the end, door cracked, light barely slipping through. I pushed it open gently, half expecting her to be sitting on the edge of the bed, humming the way she used to when she thought no one listened. But the room was still. Too still. My eyes moved across the walls, the shelves, the dresser. Then I saw it. A rectangle of clean wood on the wall, surrounded by dust. An empty frame had hung there once. Something important had lived inside it. Something someone didn't want me to see. I stood in front of that empty space for a long moment, my breath thinning. The dust outline was sharp, recent. Whoever had taken the document hadn't bothered to hide the mark it left behind. I reached out and touched the clean wood. It was smooth, like something protected it for years. What were you hiding, Mama? The words left me before I realized they were mine. The room answered with a soft creak, just one, and I turned. The wardrobe door had shifted open a little. Not fully. Just enough to feel intentional. I stepped toward it slowly. Inside, her dresses hung untouched, fabric draped like sleeping memories. I moved them aside gently, searching the backboard the way I'd seen people do in old films. Nothing. But when I slid my hand under the bottom panel, my fingers brushed an edge. A tiny wooden box. My heart stilled, then started again, quiet, uneven. I pulled it out. It was light. Too light. When I opened it, the breath left my chest. Empty. Except for a faint imprint on the velvet lining. The shape of folded paper. The missing document. The one that once sat inside. The one that belonged in the empty frame on the wall. Someone had been here long before me. Someone who knew exactly what they were taking. And why. I sat on the edge of my mother's bed, the empty box in my hands, the house settling around me like an old creature shifting in its sleep. The man's eyes flashed in my mind again, quiet, heavy, almost apologizing for something he wouldn't say. Maybe couldn't. The walls felt colder now. Closer. The secrets weren't buried here. They'd been carried out. But the house had watched it happen. It always watched. I looked toward the doorway, a soft draft brushing past me, almost like a warning. Whatever was taken from this room. Whatever she tried to leave for me, someone else wanted it more. And I had a feeling this house wasn't done telling me why. Not yet. The sun was barely up when I reached her porch, though the sky held that thin blue light that makes everything look softer than it really is. The screen door rattled in a tired way, tapping against its frame like it remembered every argument ever whispered behind it. I stood there for a moment, listening to the quiet of her house, my second home, once. The curtains inside shifted, slow and uneasy, as if someone had touched them and then stepped back into the shadows. I hadn't come for comfort today. I'd come for answers. And the morning felt too still for either one. She opened the door before I could knock. My aunt. Or the woman I had learned to call aunt, back when titles felt simple. Her hair was pinned back in a way she only did when she was expecting trouble. Her eyes softened for a second, just a second, before something else slipped over them, something heavier. "You're out early," she said. Her voice was calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that comes from rehearsing. I stepped into the living room, and the house greeted me the same way it always had, quiet, warm, smelling faintly of cardamom tea and old wood. But something had shifted. The air felt thick, like it wanted me to move gently. She sat on the edge of the sofa, her hands folding into each other. That small gesture, fingers lacing, then unlacing, was something she did when she was hiding something. I remembered that from childhood, though she probably wished I didn't. I took the chair across from her. The same one my mother used to occupy. The room felt smaller because of it. "I found something missing," I said softly. "From my mother's room." Her shoulders rose, then stopped halfway. Almost a flinch. Almost. The morning light barely touched her face, leaving half of it in shadow, half in something like truth. She didn't answer at first. Just looked at the window, the one she always claimed was too drafty. The glass caught the light, and for a moment I could see her reflection trembling, even though she wasn't. "What exactly do you think is missing?" she asked finally. I watched her lips form the question, steady, but her fingers betrayed her, tapping against her thumb like a heartbeat that didn't belong to her. "The will," I said. "The one she signed. The one someone took." Her eyes closed. Not slowly. Not dramatically. More like someone turning off a light. When she opened them again, she wore a smile that didn't belong on her face. A smile built out of defense. Or fear. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, "grief does strange things. It confuses us. Makes us think we saw things we didn't." There it was. The script she had prepared. But something in her voice cracked, just slightly, and the silence that followed wasn't comfortable. It sat in the room like a third person, listening closely. "Auntie," I said, leaning forward. "I'm not imagining anything." She stiffened. Her jaw tightened. Her hands stilled completely, like they were afraid to move. "I don't know what you expect me to say," she replied. But her eyes flicked to the hallway. Just once. Just long enough to betray her. The half-light of the room deepened around us, shadows stretching across the carpet like they had something to confess. She shifted on the sofa, her breath catching in a way she probably hoped I didn't hear. "I loved your mother," she said suddenly. Too suddenly. The words fell out, sharp around the edges. "I know," I replied. "She made mistakes," she continued, staring past me now. "We all did. But she wanted peace. She didn't want all this. All this. The secrets. The empty frame. The look the stranger gave me. The missing spaces in my memory. What did she ask you to keep from me?" I asked. Her face tightened, pulling into an expression I had never seen on her before, not anger, not sorrow, something between the two. Something that had been living in her for years. "You're imagining things," she repeated, voice cracking slightly at the edges. You're letting the past pull you under. But her hands were shaking. Not trembling politely, the way people do in movies. Shaking like someone who had carried a truth too heavy for too long. "Auntie," I whispered. "Please. Look at me." She didn't. Her eyes stayed on her own hands, as if reading the map of guilt etched across them. And when she finally spoke, it was barely audible. Some truths do more harm than good. It wasn't an answer. But it was enough to tell me she had one. I stepped out of her house feeling the morning shift around me, the air cooler, sharper, like the world had tilted just a little. Behind me, the screen door creaked shut, slow and tired, as if it had watched the whole conversation and knew it wasn't over. I could still feel her eyes on my back, not with anger, but with the weight of something unspoken. The sky had brightened, but the light felt thin, stretched too far to warm anything. The road ahead looked the same as it always had, yet different now, like it was waiting. I don't know exactly what she's protecting. Or whom. But I know this. The truth isn't hiding anymore. It's waking up. And it's coming toward me. By late afternoon, the light had thinned into that soft gold that makes shadows stretch long and quiet across the floor. I was standing near the window when I saw him again. The same man from the gate, this time closer, this time slower, like he was walking toward something he hoped wouldn't break. He paused at the porch steps, removing his hat with a kind of reverence that didn't match the dust on his shoes. The wind tugged at his coat, but he didn't move until I opened the door. For a long moment, he just looked at me. As if he wasn't sure he had the right to return. I stepped aside, letting the door swing wider, but he didn't cross the threshold right away. His hand hovered near the frame, not touching it, not pulling back either, caught between leaving and entering. "You, sure you want me inside?" he asked quietly. His voice carried that same gentleness as before, but this time it felt heavier, like he had swallowed too many years of silence. "Yes," I said. "Come in." He nodded once, almost grateful. When he stepped inside, the boards creaked beneath him in a way they never did for family, as if the house itself wasn't certain about him. He glanced around, his eyes landing on familiar corners, the table where my mother once folded laundry, the wall where she pinned her lists, the window she wiped every morning. There was a sadness in the way he saw these things. Not the sadness of loss. The sadness of memory. "I haven't been in here since." He stopped. Didn't finish the sentence. I waited. He took off his coat slowly, folding it over his arm, then held it tighter when his hands began to tremble. He wasn't trying to hide it. Maybe he was too tired for that. "I owe you the truth," he said. "And I owe her more than I ever gave." His words drifted into the quiet room like dust, settling in places truth had never reached. He stayed standing at first, as if he felt he didn't deserve a seat. But I pointed to the chair across from me, the one that faced the window, and after a moment's hesitation, he lowered himself into it. "The letter," he said, clearing his throat. "I promised her I'd deliver it, but only when the danger had passed. When things were calm." "Danger from who?" I asked. He looked down at his hands. Rough hands. Hands that had worked, protected, maybe even harmed for the sake of a secret. "From the people who wanted her quiet," he said softly. I felt my breath slip. He didn't look up. "I kept watch," he continued. "Not close enough to disturb your life, but never far enough to lose sight of you. Your mother, she asked me to make sure the truth wouldn't hurt you while you were still young." My chest tightened. "You've been watching me?" "From a distance," he repeated. "Only to keep my promise." She was afraid. More afraid than she ever let you see. His shoulders sagged as if the years were finally allowed to rest on him. "She wrote that letter knowing she might not get another chance to speak freely. But it's only part of what she wanted to say." I leaned forward. "What's the rest?" He exhaled, slow and waited. It's in a place she visited often. A place she trusted more than anyone. She said you'd understand it, once you stood where she used to stand. For a while, neither of us spoke. The house seemed to hold its breath, listening, waiting to see what truth might come next. The man rubbed his thumb along a seam in his coat, tracing the frayed thread again and again. "There's more you're not telling me," I said quietly. He nodded once, but didn't lift his head. "I feared the wrong people might find you," he said. "Or that someone would come for the letter before you ever saw it." "Who?" I whispered. His eyes finally met mine, and in them I saw exhaustion, old, familiar exhaustion that didn't belong to a stranger. "The same people who kept her will from you. The same ones who took things from this house. They thought she wrote down more than she did. They thought she left proof." A heaviness settled in my stomach, the kind that doesn't move easily. "Did you know my mother well?" I asked. He closed his eyes as though the question burned. "I knew her better than she wanted people to think," he said. Then after a pause, "I made a promise to protect what mattered to her. Even if it meant staying silent longer than I should have." The regret in his voice was soft. But it cut like something sharper. "What did she ask you to protect?" I asked again. This time, he didn't hesitate. "You." The word hung in the air like smoke, thin and lingering. He stood slowly, almost reluctantly, as if leaving the chair meant tearing himself away from her memory. The sun had lowered behind the trees outside, casting long shadows across the floor, his joining mine, then stretching past it, as if reaching for something neither of us could see. "I'll take you to the place," he said softly. "When you're ready." I nodded, though I didn't know when that would be. The truth felt close now, close enough to touch, but still wrapped in fog. He put his hat back on, the brim trembling slightly in his hand. "I kept my promise," he whispered. "But it's time you saw what she left behind." When he stepped out onto the porch, the light shifted. And for the first time, I felt the story moving toward me. Not away. The cedar tree stood at the edge of the yard, its shadow long and dark against the last light of day. The branches whispered as the wind moved through them, a low, restless sound I hadn't noticed as a child. I knelt at its base, feeling the rough bark under my fingertips, tracing the way its roots dug into the earth like fingers gripping secrets. There was a hollow there, just where the letter had told me to look. The soil smelled faintly of pine and damp earth, the scent of something old and patient. I could feel the air shift around me, charged with a weight I hadn't expected. And then, half buried beneath the roots, I saw it, a metal box, taped and rusted, waiting. I hesitated before touching it. The box was heavier than I expected, coated in grime and the kind of rust that takes years to form. My fingers brushed the tape first, feeling the faint ridges beneath the sticky layers. The cedar's branches shook gently above me, dropping needles onto the soil like whispers. I could almost hear her voice here, soft and low, telling me to be careful. Telling me that the secrets of the earth were patient, they waited for those who would listen. I took a deep breath, the smell of pine and damp dirt filling my lungs, grounding me. I knelt lower, brushing away the leaves and debris. The metal beneath my hands was cold, stubborn, unyielding, and yet somehow familiar. The box felt alive. Not in a threatening way, but in the way a memory lingers in a room long after the people are gone. My mother's presence hovered here, not as a ghost, but as intention. I thought of the letter, of the stranger, of her handwriting curling across paper in that quiet, deliberate way. And I thought of my own hands, hands that had never held her secrets before. I set my teeth lightly against my bottom lip, hesitating. Then I lifted the lid. The box gave a soft protest, a small groan of metal against tape, and I felt my pulse quicken. Inside, the contents were layered with care. Photographs, some faded, some sharp with color, showed my mother smiling, alone, with friends, in places I had never known. Receipts, some from cafes, others from hotels or small shops, suggested journeys I hadn't imagined. At the bottom, there was a sheaf of papers tied with a faded ribbon. I lifted it out carefully, my fingers brushing the rough edges of time. A copy of a will lay on top, yellowed and slightly crumpled. My heart thumped in my chest. I studied it, tracing the lines of her handwriting, the familiar curves and loops that had comforted me in letters and notes over the years. She had left instructions here, careful, deliberate, protective. Each word felt weighted with intention, as if she knew someone would try to claim them before I arrived. But then I noticed it. At the very end, a page had been torn away. The final sheet was gone. The edge of the remaining paper was jagged, and the ink on the previous page seemed to ache where it ended abruptly. My stomach sank. Who had come here before me? Who had broken her careful plan? And why? The wind shifted, rustling the cedar's needles overhead, and the box seemed heavier now, as if the earth itself was holding its breath with me. I sank to the ground beside the tree, holding the box against my knees. I flipped through the photographs again, searching for clues, faces I recognized, places I had been, the faintest hint of betrayal in a shadow, a glance, a smile. Each image felt deliberate, a story I was only beginning to understand. The receipts were small fragments of a life lived quietly but intentionally. Each date, each location, a breadcrumb left behind, a map for me to follow. But the will, the missing page, made the puzzle incomplete. Someone had intervened. Someone had taken the part that mattered most. I pressed my palms into the dirt, feeling the cedar's roots beneath me, the rough grooves and soft earth. It was almost like the tree itself had been a guardian, watching, waiting for me to arrive. And yet, even the guardian had limits. I realized I wasn't just uncovering her story, I was confronting someone else's interference, someone who had decided what I should know and what I should not. My mother had trusted this place, trusted the earth, trusted me, and yet, that trust had been violated. The sun had slipped lower behind the hills. Shadows lengthened. The box in my hands felt like a heartbeat, fragile and steady, carrying a warning as much as a memory. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the cedar shade me, listening to the wind stir the needles. The torn page haunted me. Its absence was more present than anything else in the box. Who had been here before me, and what had they taken? I set the box gently back into the hollow beneath the roots, brushing dirt and needles from its edges. The cedar's branches shook lightly, letting more fall around me, like whispers of warning or encouragement, I couldn't tell which. The air was charged, thick with the weight of all that had been hidden and all that remained. I could feel the earth exhaling, as if releasing its hold just enough to let me see a part of the truth, but not all. I rose slowly, stepping back. The shadows of the tree stretched across the yard, reaching past me, holding space for the secrets it had carried so long. The will was here. The photographs. The receipts. And the missing page. But the final truth, the part she had wanted me to understand most, had been ripped away. And I knew I wasn't the only one who had been watching. The story was not finished. And neither was the waiting. The night air felt different, thicker somehow, as if it carried something left unfinished. I sat on the edge of my bed with the journal open on my lap, the torn documents spread out beside me like small, wounded things. The lamp cast a soft circle of light, barely enough to touch the words on the page. Every shadow in the room seemed to lean in, listening, waiting. I traced my finger over the date written in her neat handwriting. A date so close to the night she died it made my breath catch. It felt like she was sitting somewhere just beyond the light, trying to say something she never had the chance to finish. I turned the fragile pages carefully, the paper thin enough to reveal the faint impressions of her pen strokes on the next sheet. My mother had always written softly, as if even her words didn't want to disturb anyone. But these entries. They trembled. The handwriting wavered. Letters leaned into each other like they were searching for a place to hide. Outside my window, the wind moved through the yard in slow waves, brushing against the house the way she used to run her hand along my back when I was small. A gentle sweep, a quiet reassurance, one I needed now more than ever. The cedar tree stood in the dark, just visible through the glass. Even from here, it looked older than time, its branches curved like shoulders that had carried too much. I wondered how many nights she had come out there with this journal in her hand, looking over her shoulder, writing fear into the lines of a page. The house felt too still. Too aware. As if it knew something I didn't. I leaned closer to her last complete entry, the ink darker there, pressed harder than usual. It felt like she had hesitated before writing it, sat for a moment, listening to something outside the room. Something she didn't name. The entries began small. Notes about her day. The groceries she bought. People she met in town. Soft moments, ordinary ones. But beneath them ran a thin thread, a quiet tremor. Then the tone shifted. He was in the yard again tonight. Someone knocked on the door, but no one was there. I keep hearing footsteps on the gravel. Slow ones. I lifted my head, listening to the silence around me. The gravel path outside lay untouched now, but her words made me hear it anyway, the crunch of someone moving with intention, slow enough to be heard, slow enough to be feared. Another entry read. The arguments are getting louder. They stop when I walk into the room. I swallowed hard. I had been a child then. Too young to understand whispers behind closed doors. Too trusting to hear the difference between concern and control. I flipped to the next page. Her words grew sharper. Shorter. More breathless. I think he's following me. Saw the shadow again near the cedar. If something happens. The sentence ended there. Not crossed out. Not smudged. Just stopped. As if she'd lifted her pen to listen. Or breathe. Or run. The space afterward felt like a cliff. A pause too long to be anything but fear. I stared at that unfinished sentence, my thumb brushing the edge of the page. The ink ended abruptly, a tiny trail leading nowhere. It felt like a hand reaching out and disappearing mid-grasp. The torn documents on the floor caught the corner of my eye. The dates circled in red. The same week she had stopped coming out of her room early in the morning. The same week she had told me to stay close, to not answer the door unless she said so. I remembered the way she had held me that night, her arms tight, her breath shaky against my hair. She said she was just tired. That she had too much on her mind. But now, reading these words, I could feel the truth rising through the years like cold water. She had been afraid. Not of a thought. Not of a memory. Of someone. Someone who argued behind closed doors. Someone who walked the gravel path slowly enough to be heard. Someone who ripped out the last page of her will. The wind outside tightened, brushing against the house with a low moan, and I felt the room contract around me. Had she tried to warn me in the only way she knew how? In soft words. In quiet pages. In the way she held me a little too long the night before she died. My fingers trembled as I closed the journal. The air in the room thickened, the walls leaning in as if they had been waiting for me to understand. And I did. Finally. Painfully. She knew. Long before I did. She knew. I placed the journal on the floor beside the torn documents, the lamp's warm circle of light brushing the edges of each fragile truth. Outside, the cedar tree swayed in the dark, its branches moving like someone pacing slowly beneath it. The same path she had walked. The same place she had hidden her last hope for me. I stood there for a long time, listening to the quiet hum of the house. It felt like the walls were breathing with me, slow, uneven, carrying something heavy. Her last words remained unfinished, hanging in the air like a whisper that never reached my ear. But I heard her now. Clearer than ever. And I knew the next page. The one torn away. Held the truth of the night she died. I just had to find who took it. The office smelled of old leather and polished wood. Afternoon sunlight fell in slants through half-closed blinds, cutting the room into golden rectangles that lay across the floor like evidence. I sat across from the lawyer, the torn pages of my mother's will spread between us. Each piece felt fragile, the edges curling as if the air itself remembered the years they had been hidden. He tapped a finger lightly on the papers. This is significant," he said. His voice was soft, deliberate, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile truths waiting to be spoken. I looked down at the lines of her handwriting, looping and careful, and felt something shift inside me. The weight of the secrets, the years of lies, finally pressing into clarity. I traced her words slowly, my fingers hovering over the ink. The edges of the torn pages threatened to crumble beneath the lightest touch. Each letter carried her voice, cautious, deliberate, protective. The office was quiet except for the low hum of the air conditioner and the soft scratch of the lawyer's pen on a notepad. Outside, the city moved on as if unaware of the decades of deception buried in one family home. I tried to keep my breathing steady. My chest felt tight, a little hollow. This was the moment I had feared and longed for at the same time, the truth, stripped of pretense, finally in front of me. The lawyer pushed a magnifying glass toward me, then leaned back. "Even partial, it's clear. Your mother intended this land to go to you. Solely. Solely." The word echoed inside me. All the stories my relatives had told me. All the explanations, the casual dismissals, the veiled suggestions that I'd never inherit anything, they began to unravel. One by one, they fell apart under the light of her words. It was as if she had been whispering across time, through paper and ink, to guide me toward what was always mine. We began to piece the pages together like fragments of a memory. Each tear, each fold, held significance. Names, numbers, land descriptions, instructions, all pointing to me. The lawyer traced a finger along the line, hesitant. "Hiding a will is rarely the act of a single person," he said softly. I felt a chill. The implication stretched further than I wanted to admit. Greed alone could not erase her words. It required coordination. Silence. Complicity. I thought of my relatives, their soft smiles, the casual remarks, the way they had always steered conversations, small gestures meant to persuade, to distract. Had all of this been calculated? The past seemed suddenly sharper, edges I had once walked past without noticing now cutting deep. The lawyer handed me another torn sheet. It was fragile, the ink smudged, and the signature at the bottom unmistakable. I felt my stomach tighten. This was her voice, declaring me the rightful heir. The weight of years of deception pressed down on me. I folded the paper carefully, tracing her signature with a fingertip. The world I thought I knew, of family, of loyalty, of quiet affection, was suddenly fractured. Every memory I had of them now carried a shadow I couldn't unsee. "Do you understand what this means?" the lawyer asked gently. I nodded, though my throat felt tight. It meant that the stories they had told me were lies. And that the truth had been buried beneath those lies for decades. I left the lawyer's office carrying the weight of the partially reconstructed will like a stone pressed to my chest. Outside, the air was warmer, softer, the sun lowering over the city. But I felt the years of concealment in my bones, heavy and relentless. For the first time, I imagined the confrontation to come. Their faces, the small smiles that never reached their eyes, the casual dismissals, they had treated my inheritance like a game, a prize they could hoard. And now the rules had changed. I ran my hand along the torn pages again, thinking about what had been removed, what had been hidden. Someone had gone to great lengths to keep me from knowing. And I realized, with a quiet sting, that they had also underestimated me. The partial will was enough to start unraveling their carefully woven story. Each lie, each omission, each manipulation began to unravel thread by thread. The truth didn't scream. It seeped. Quietly. Patiently. I walked through the streets, the papers folded against my chest, thinking about my mother. She had trusted me with this truth. She had waited for me to discover it, to hold it, to honor it. And now I could. The years of control, of hiding, of whispering behind closed doors, they were ending. And I would meet them with this truth, steady and deliberate. That night, I returned to the house I had grown up in, laying the torn pages carefully on the table. The lamp above me cast soft shadows, and the walls seemed to lean closer, listening. I could feel the weight of her words, her intention, and the quiet power of the truth pressing forward. The land, the inheritance, the fragments of years-long secrets, they were mine. And yet, the room carried an uneasy quiet. A question hung in the air: what would they say when I confronted them? Would they admit the lies, the complicity, or would they retreat into the carefully maintained stories they had spent decades telling? I touched her signature, the loops and curves still sharp in memory, and whispered to the empty room, "I know now. And I will honor it." Outside, the wind shifted, brushing against the trees like a soft warning. The next steps were mine to take, and the story, finally, was beginning to move toward justice. The hallway smelled of old wood polish and something colder, fear, maybe, left behind like dust. I stepped in, the envelope and torn pages clutched tightly in my hands. Every footstep against the creaking floor sounded louder than it should, as if the house itself were holding its breath. They were all there, seated in the living room, the way they always had been, faces composed, masks in place. But I could see the lines, the tremors beneath the surface. I cleared my throat softly, holding their gaze. They didn't speak. They didn't have to. The silence itself carried decades of secrets, and I knew it was finally my turn to break it. I stood in the middle of the room, the afternoon sunlight filtering through sheer curtains, catching the dust motes that floated lazily in the air. It seemed ordinary, peaceful, but the weight in my chest told a different story. The envelope felt heavy in my hands, heavier than paper and ink should ever be. It held her words. Her voice. The proof that the life I had known, and the stories they had told me, were built on lies. I looked around the faces of my relatives, my aunt, my uncle, cousins I had once trusted. Their eyes flicked to mine, then away, tracing familiar patterns, avoiding confrontation. They shifted in their seats, small movements that betrayed discomfort, and I realized how long they had been rehearsing this avoidance. The house itself seemed to lean in, listening. Its walls had absorbed years of whispered conversations, quiet manipulations, veiled threats. And now the truth, my mother's carefully preserved truth, was pressing through that silence, demanding acknowledgement. I opened the envelope slowly, letting the papers fall lightly to the floor. The torn pages of her will spread before them, her handwriting sharp and deliberate. Every word a small shock, a reminder that she had thought of me, even when they tried to bury her intent. Rising moment, 200 to 250 words. They didn't speak. Not at first. Their silence was brittle, heavy with unspoken histories, with everything that had been hidden and denied. I let my eyes trace the lines of their faces, the subtle flickers, the trembling hands, the tight mouths, and I understood what they had carried: guilt. I read the first line aloud, my voice steady despite the quake in my chest. If you are reading this, they have kept the truth from you. The room didn't respond. It was as if my words hovered in the air, waiting for acknowledgement, and they could not give it. I held up the torn pages of the will. She wanted this to be yours, I said softly. This land, this inheritance, she made sure it was yours alone. Eyes lowered. Hands clutched together. A cough, brief, hesitant. They didn't deny it. They didn't need to. Their gaze avoided mine, searching for any escape, any crack in the walls of this confrontation. I let the silence stretch. It was heavy. It was final. I didn't shout. I didn't demand apologies. I simply let the truth sit there, like sunlight on old furniture, illuminating all the dust and shadows they had tried to hide behind. Later that night, I found myself beneath the cedar tree, the place my mother had chosen as her sanctuary. The moonlight brushed the rough bark, and the shadows of its branches stretched across the grass like long fingers reaching for me. I unfolded the final letter again, the one she had entrusted to the stranger. Her words, gentle and deliberate, felt alive in the quiet night. Tell the truth gently, and let the rest fall where it must. I traced the ink with my fingertip, feeling the curves of her letters, the careful pressure she had applied. It was both instruction and blessing, a final request that carried the weight of her love and her caution. I realized then that she had known this day would come. That the truth would finally meet the faces of those who had hidden it. And she had prepared me, not for revenge, not for anger, but for patience. For clarity. For the quiet power of letting the truth stand on its own. The wind moved through the cedar branches, rustling the leaves in a low, deliberate whisper. It felt as though the house, the tree, and even the night itself were watching, bearing witness to the final act she had set in motion. As the first light of dawn touched the horizon, I folded the letter and placed it carefully in my pocket. The torn wool lay beside me on the grass, the pages fluttering in the gentle morning breeze. I sat for a long time, listening to the world awaken, the soft rustle of leaves, the distant hum of traffic, the faint song of birds. Everything felt different now. Clear. Quiet. Resolved, but still heavy with the knowledge of what had been hidden. I wondered, finally, if uncovering the truth had been her gift, or her warning. Perhaps both. Perhaps the only way to honor her was to speak gently, carry forward what she had entrusted to me, and let the rest fall where it must. And as the sun rose, bathing the cedar tree in golden light, I felt her presence there, patient, guiding, and unyielding. The story was mine now, and the next steps would be mine to take.